Made in Abyss is the king of world building in anime, or just in media in general. It has such a distinct and interesting world that sets it apart from so many other fantasy anime nowadays, especially in the current climate of the same copy and pasted worlds being used for like every single fantasy series. The world of Made in Abyss is comprised of the Abyss, which is a hole that extends deep into the Earth's core. This massive hole is then split into different layers depending on their depth, with each of the layers of the Abyss being made of different forms of topography and different climates, with the flora and fauna changing constantly depending on the layers as well. In total, there are 7 layers in the Abyss, 5 of which have been fully explored and experienced in the anime. However, not every layer is made equally. With such a hyper-developed and extremely detailed world as Made in Abyss, it's only natural that some parts of the world are less interesting than others, as in the anime, the higher-up layers usually serve as a lead-up to the more interesting developments later on. However, despite the fact that the layers of the Abyss tend to get more complex as you go down, my enjoyment of the story doesn't actually always go up each layer the main characters descend. And because I haven't heard of anyone doing this to my knowledge, I decided to make a video ranking of each of the layers of the Abyss from 1 through 5, talking about every conceivable aspect of it that I can recall. And I promise you guys right now that the rankings won't be as simple as, this one is deeper, thus it is better. And before we get into the ranking, I won't really be giving much story context for this, as I'm going to assume most of you already know at least something about Made in Abyss. But if not, feel free to watch my last video on Made in Abyss to get you caught up. And with that in mind, I also may spoil some aspects of the story or world if some of you aren't caught up with the Made in Abyss movie. Anyways, enough stalling, let's get into it. So in 5th place, I have the 3rd layer, the Great Fault, and I would like to quickly say that the Great Fault is by no means a bad part of the world of Made in Abyss, it's just not the best. One thing I actually really like about the Great Fault is its integration with the 2 layers next to it, the 2nd and 4th layers. On the 2nd layer, there's an area which is full of trees growing upside down as a result of the heavy updrafts from the 3rd layer, and in the 4th layer, there's a creature known as the Kazura Squid, whose eggs hatch on the 3rd layer and drop down into the 4th layer. Both of these relationships are interesting and cool, however, the layer that the 3rd layer interacts with are just cooler and better than the 3rd layer in almost every single way. So, the 3rd layer is essentially just a giant pit that extends straight down towards the 4th layer with almost vertical sides. Because of this, there's only one true way to traverse the 3rd layer safely, and that's through the tunnels that run through the side of the Abyss. And while I find it cool that the explorers of the Abyss have to go through such a drastically more claustrophobic and cramped setting than they had in the 1st or 2nd layers, I just don't really find the tunnels very interesting. The creatures that inhabit it are cute and all, and there's some interesting scenery in some of the larger caves, but it all feels so much smaller scale compared to all the other layers that came before and after it. And while I can't say this layer was bad in any way, it just wasn't the best. Although it was raised up a couple points because of the ship embedded into the side of the 3rd layer. This addition adds so much character to the 3rd layer more than just like a frickin' hole, which it very much needs. In 4th place, I have the 1st layer, also known as the Edge of the Abyss. It is called as such because of its proximity to the surface, but honestly, even though this layer is the most tame and normal of all the layers of the Abyss, it is still a treat to experience. This layer mostly consists of grasslands with sloping hills covered in greenery spanning as far as the eye can see. Although the land is dotted with drops and cliffs, this is still the Abyss after all, this layer is still very safe, with very little malicious creatures ever making their way up to this layer. The occasional waterfall here and there, added to by the constant presence of shrubs and trees, makes this layer feel alive and thriving, and while its scenery isn't the most interesting in the Abyss, it still makes up for this with breathtaking views, added to by the sense of comfort you feel in this layer. The amount of lore for the Abyss that can also be found on this layer adds a lot to its charm. One of these bits of lore comes in the form of skeletons, which can be found stuck in praying positions all around the 1st layer, hidden in tombs and graves of stone. These skeletons are never officially explained in the anime, however their existence alone adds a lot to the intrigue and mystery of the Abyss, by giving hints to an ancient society that supposedly existed there long ago. These skeletons, along with the buildings that lay scattered around the Abyss, are a mysterious existence, and their involvement in the story is one of the many reasons I find the Abyss so fascinating. My 3rd favorite layer, coming in unsurprisingly after the 1st layer, is the 2nd layer, the Forest of Temptation. This layer is the 2nd one we see and is the one in which the seemingly normal looking surroundings evolve into something more alien. This layer is known as the Forest of Temptation due to the vast amounts of foliage that cover this layer. A lot of it looks just like a rainforest, with the trees being a lot more dense than they were in the 1st layer. To add to the slightly increased danger, there's more drastic geographic features, inhabited by more vicious and ferocious creatures. The fact that low-level adventurers are considered dead if they make their way down to this layer adds greatly to the feeling of unease that worms its way into your mind. The environmental diversity and geographic change between the second and first layer does a lot to make the Forest of Temptation more interesting to me. The first layer looks similar to a field or simple forest with the occasional trees or river, and while it's still very appealing, the higher drops and crazier geographical features make the second layer a lot more unique than the first. To add to that, the inverted forest, which is the lowest section of the second layer, is one of the coolest and most iconic scenes to me from Made in Abyss. The idea that the wind is so strong that it causes the trees to grow upside down is so insanely cool, and the way the main characters traverse this area by making their way from one upside down tree to the next makes the whole situation so tense and dramatic, compared to the usual way they traverse the abyss up until that point. This area also houses the base of Ozin, who I love, which helps this layer a bit as well. If I had to pinpoint one part of this layer which I feel is worse, I would have to just point at the seeming normalcy at times. Later layers are a lot more distinct than each other, and even the third layer is an impossible mistake for any other layer. But the second layer on occasion can just be mistaken for a more dramatic version of the first layer. It makes sense because this is only the second layer of the abyss and they can't really go that insane with the topography, but still, this combined with the type of environments presented in this layer is what makes it ranked lower than the next two layers. In second place, we have the fifth layer, also known as the Sea of Corpses. This layer is fantastic. It's an insanely wide ocean with crystallized ice structures around to walk on. Resting on top of this ocean are multiple pools of water held up by ice and bones. This layer is so breathtaking to look at. It's by far the most visually stimulating of the layers we've looked at so far. The atmosphere can almost be called Arctic, with the constant presence of water and ice setting the tone for this area. If I had to quickly point out my one problem with this layer, it would be the lack of time we got to spend in it. This layer is the one explored in the Made in Abyss movie, which is mostly focused on the interactions of the main characters with the Sovereign of the Dawn, Bondrewd. Because of this, a lot of our time in this layer is spent in the Edo front, Bondrewd's personal fortress, which he occupies along with his helpers, the Ambara Hands. And while the Edo front is also breathtaking in its own right, with the unearthly lights breaking forth from its center, along with the massive pool of water being held atop it, its involvement in the story doesn't allow for as much subtle world building as there is in Made in Abyss Season 1, which is the one that introduces us to layers 1 through 4. However, despite this handicap, this layer is still superb. The few creatures we get to see swimming in the depths of the Sea of Corpses, combined with the fact that you would face certain death from the curse of the sixth layer if you were to descend beneath its waves, sends attention through the roof. This, coupled with the curse of this layer, which causes you to lose all of your senses when you ascend, makes traversing this layer incredibly dangerous, as one risky climb can cause you to lose all of your senses and go tumbling into the deadly waters below. Also, these creatures, the stinger heads, these weird alien multiple-tailed scorpion things, are super freaking cool, even for their limited appearance in the story. Because of this layer's lack of height, the large water support in the center of this layer, which is suspended over the Edo front, is almost constantly in view, looming over the proceedings with an ominous sort of aura. Personally, I really like this layer's colors and atmosphere, with everything being sort of ethereal and surreal, as one would expect from the final layer a human can venture to, while still being able to ascend alive. Finally, my favorite layer, and the reason I made this video in the first place. The fourth layer, the Goblets of Giants. To me, this layer has always been the most iconic of the entire Abyss. It's what comes to mind when I think of Made in Abyss. Its alien surroundings and otherworldly glow just make me feel so in awe of everything that transpires on this layer. This layer has some of the most insanely varied topography and physical features. Starting at the top is the most iconic view of this layer, the actual goblets from which this layer receives its name. The goblets are in actuality large vines that stretch from the bottom of the fourth layer all the way to the top, where they spread out into the platter shape that we all know and love, receiving the name Flat Creepers. These flat creepers are a gorgeous addition to this layer. When filled, they almost seem to glow, adding to the foggy and overcast atmosphere that is often present on this layer. The flat creepers also make traversing this layer extremely interesting, much like the inverted forest on the second layer, forcing adventurers to find workarounds to get across the large gaps from one creeper to the next. The existence of dangerous creatures such as orb piercers that also roam this area makes this section so much more intimidating, as the fog can often hide ill-wishers from view until the last possible second. A little lower than this, the landscape turns vertical as the trunks of the flat creepers extend all the way close to the bottom of the fourth layer. This section isn't the most interesting, but it makes sense for it to exist, and we don't spend much time on it in the anime, which I am grateful for. As you near the bottom of the fourth layer, their surroundings level out and gradually shape themselves into a gently sloped hill covered in bioluminescent mushrooms and trees. Unfortunately, this area isn't as well explored as the other parts of the fourth layer that lie at the top, which I find kind of depressing because this area could have made the fourth layer even more interesting. But anyways, I digress. Even further down at the edge of the 4th layer is the Garden of Eternal Fortunes, which is an amazing reprieve from the dull gloom of the rest of this layer. The contrast of the brightly lit and vibrant flower garden and the alien goblets that populate the extreme ends of this layer make this feel like its own little world in and of itself, away from the rest of the abyss. I also love the fact that even though the flowers are the focus in the garden, many large and looming vines can still be seen in the background, which reminds you you're still in the same nightmarish layer from earlier. This Garden of Tranquility being corrupted by bugs in the Dawn of the Deep Soul movie also does a lot to set the tone for that entire movie, as seeing such a pristine and beautiful place as this get turned into a death trap by the Amaranthine Deceptors makes you wary of the coming future. But anyways, I'm getting off track. Laying higher on this layer is Nanachi's abode, which is a nice little hut hidden in the edge of the 4th layer. It is a great reprieve from the intense strangeness of the Goblets of Giants, and is a little haven of safety for the main characters to relax in, even while they are stuck in such a foreign and unnatural place. Besides Nanachi also being a great character, I also really like their place of residence. Its design is very reminiscent to the Seeker Camp of the 2nd layer, harkening back to a place of security and comfort. The peaceful and serene area in the back of the house filled with eternal fortunes and trees is also a nice touch, which makes you forget about the horrors of the rest of this layer, if even for a moment. This layer is honestly the total package. It carries with it the entire wonder and intrigue of the abyss just on its own. Its otherworldly landscape fills you with amazement and curiosity and a longing to explore. Its virtues and vices both entice and shock you, giving you such a complete and complex feeling towards this land. The one section of this world of Maiden Abyss is many times more interesting and amazing than the worlds of so many other fantasy stories, and this isn't even the end. The 6th and 7th layers are still yet to be revealed, and if they are explored properly, I truly believe that Maiden Abyss can only get better from the end of the movie. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's a bit different from the rest because it's kind of aimed at people who are already at least somewhat familiar with this series and its intrigue. If any of you have different rankings or different opinions on any of these layers, let me know in the comments. I'm honestly interested to see if you guys' rankings are any different from mine. Anyways, with that being said, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you later. Bye!